Thank you, worship team. I have a very serious message. I'm kidding. I mean, it is serious, but it's glorious. Because I'm going to talk about the anger of God this morning. And it's something, some people like to talk about it all the time. And I think they like to talk about it so that they can make you behave. I'm not even interested trying to make you behave. That's a losing battle. But I do want you to be obedient to Jesus and behave to him. My daughter, Carrie, was the youth pastor here for how long, Carrie? 13 years. 13 years. I'm going to tell on her. I'm going to spill the beans. You know, this is, don't you like how we change things around here? That I love the chairs. Oh, I love the chairs. Anyone else like the chairs? Oh, yeah. Yeah, thank you. This building was made not to house the Holy Spirit, but it was created for the purpose of people coming in and worshiping the Lord, and you house the Holy Spirit. And so you might put it this way. When we use this building like we did this morning, this building is holy. It's a holy place. Or another term that is used in a biblical way is it's sanctified. And what that means, it's being used for the purpose in which it was created. Now the story about Carrie. 13 years. Carrie devised this game. And the game was played in the sanctuary. It's a game called baseball. You're familiar with that? Now, I don't know how she actually did it, but I'm told that there's different bases out there, and I was told on the pews, on the base, that they would stand on it to catch the ball that someone would hit. Now, what would you call that? You would call that unholy, because the building was not created for that purpose. Now, no, just a point to let you know, I didn't have any problem with that. I didn't have any problem with that at all. In fact, if it wasn't so late when they did it on New Year's Eve and that kind of thing, 3 o'clock in the morning, I might have come and joined them because I'm a pretty good ball player. But that would be called unholy because it was being used for a purpose in which it wasn't created. We have a brand new dog. The dog's Rosie. Now, this puppy, a Boston Terrier, is just the cutest little thing and a snuggler, oh my. Loves to get on your neck and just snuggle with you. And Carrie and Pam went out and bought these chew things. Toys that she can chew on. They were created for that purpose, for the dogs to chew on it. And so they bought a bunch. I mean, I don't know how many we have, a bunch of them. Those toys are unholy because that dog does not chew on those things. That dog chews on the furniture, and Amber's been gone, the last couple of weeks. She's been working on this nice furniture that used to be stained really dark, used to be, and all around the edges. Now, you might say, well, why don't you train the dog? Well, we're working on it. Quit being critical. But the dog's deaf, and so it's kind of difficult. But you would say that furniture, it was not made for the purpose of the dog to chew, so that furniture is unholy. That furniture is not sanctified. Now, of course, you might understand where I'm going with this, is that we're to be holy and we're to be sanctified. That means that we're to be used for the purpose in which we're created for. And a lot of things that we do are unholy and unsanctified because we do things that are not for the purpose of God. You know what that's called? Sin. All have sinned. All have missed the mark of that holiness, missed the mark of that being sanctified, and come short of the glory of God. Now, I talked a little bit about that last week. We're going to go on and talk about, okay, so what happens if you're not sanctified? What happens if you're unholy? Because the New Testament does tell us to be holy, for He is holy. Now listen, if you get nervous and you've gone to a church where the pastor brought condemnation on, you don't have to worry about that here. I'm not going to do that. And if you know Jesus Christ, there is now therefore no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus. But I think that we do need to talk a little bit about this unholiness and the anger of God that comes. And so let's go to our text that we started last week. And it's in Exodus 36. I'm going to start with this 6th verse. And it says, the Lord passed before Moses, and proclaimed. Now he says, hey, Moses, I'm going to give you what I'm all about. Remember what Moses said, Lord, show me your glory. And God said, I'll show you my goodness. And then later he calls that goodness his glory. Now, this is so significant and this concept is so important that I hope that each one of us can grasp it, get a hold of it, of what the very glory of God is. Because all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And He wants to do something in our life that will live for Him for the purpose in which we were created, bringing glory and honor to Him. Now, let me tell you, you can come on a Sunday morning and you can even raise your hands. And you can even, if we were a church like that, you can even do a little dance, but that doesn't make you holy. So let's figure out what it's going to be, what it's going to take for us to be holy. And maybe a light will come on to some of us. And maybe some of us will make an adjustment in our life to serve Him and to live for His purpose and for His honor and for His glory. And maybe even someone here that doesn't know Jesus Christ, who will one day know the very wrath of God because you don't accept Him, you turn from Him. But maybe this will be your day. So he says, the Lord passed by before him and proclaimed, the Lord, Yahweh, Yahweh. He says His name twice. The name that we use, the Lord, Jehovah, Yahweh. But then he begins to go into His characteristics of His glory on who He is, on the very essence of who He is. And he begins with this, a God merciful and gracious. A God merciful and gracious. Now let me tell you, I like that he begins with that. I like that he begins with this idea that his very essence and who he is toward us is that he's merciful and gracious. Now, I don't know about you, but that's what I need. That's the very thing I need, because I don't look at myself as a really holy guy. Did I say God? Definitely not a holy God. I don't look at myself as this super Christian, because I know sometimes my thoughts. I also know sometimes my selfishness. And so the first thing that he comes across to us on his very essence as who he is that he's merciful and gracious. And then he says he's slow to anger. He doesn't say a God of rage, a God who's hateful, a God who is ugly toward his creation. No, it says slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. Verse 7, keeping steadfast love for thousands, generations. Now that's the thought there. Forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. Those three types of forgiveness, those three types of sin covers everything, any and all sins. But who will by no means clear the guilty. Now, I'm not going to deal with that, but let me just tell you what that means. Because he just gets through saying that he forgives all of our transgressions. Well, what does he mean? He'll by no means clear the guilty. And you get a good picture of that in the New Testament where Paul says something like this: be not deceived, God is not mocked. Now, he's telling the church this. Be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that he will also reap. Now, the idea is that he's going to forgive you and he's going to love you, but he's going to let you take upon the responsibilities of the things that you do. And some of those things are very painful. Some of those things, we bring hell on our lives in this earth that we live in. Because he goes on and he says, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, our kids, and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. That the very things that we do in our sin nature, and we're not going to get away with those things. He'll have mercy. And as we come to him and we ask for forgiveness, he'll forgive us and he'll save us, and we'll have this relationship with him, but we're still going to reap some things. And sad to say, and the heartbreak of it all is we pass those things down to our children. And so parents, be careful. Be careful. I remember in more than one occasion, and I thought, you're so stupid, parent. I know, that's when I was self-righteous back in judging people. But I remember a parent who was yelling at the kids. And the oldest one had enough, getting close to a teenager, and yelled back at Dad. And Dad said, "Who do you think you are?" Come here, and he whipped him. And he said, "Don't you ever talk to me that way." Later on, when he had calmed down, and I told him, I said, do you realize what you did? You were yelling at them, and you were teaching them to yell. You were teaching them that that's what you do in tough circumstances. That's what you do when the pressure's on. That's what you do when things aren't going quite your way. And that's why he was yelling back at you. You're just reaping what you sowed, and it is passed down right into your children. So parents, be careful. Be careful. Because whatever you do and whatever sins, it's just going to be passed right down to your children. And that's the hard thing of life. That's the difficulty. But it also ought to sober us up a little bit. Can you agree with that? It ought to bring us to a place, oh, God, help me. God, help me. I'm telling you, when my kids were little, I probably prayed that more than anything else. God, help me. I read every book that was available. I read every Dobson article, every book that he had on child rearing. I read it all. And I knew I still was messing up. So God, when he forgives us, he still allows us to go through the things that we have created in our life because of our sin nature. He's there to help pick up the pieces. And you might feel sometime like Humpty Dumpty that fell off the wall, and all the king's men and all the king's horses couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again, and they can't, and psychologists can't, and it's just not going to happen. But I'll tell you one that can, Jesus Christ, who can do something of a miracle in your heart, do something, a miracle in your soul that will absolutely change the direction of your life. And in changing the direction of your life will change the direction of your kids' lives as well. So that's where we kind of are. Now, then that 8th verse, I just got to read the 8th verse again. And Moses quickly bowed his head toward the earth and worshiped. Let's do that. Father, we bow before you as people with feet of clay, as people who think way too highly of ourselves, a people who fail way too often, and yet you're there to love on us. You're there to care for us. You're there to do miracles in our life. And so today, Lord, as we learn a little bit about your anger, I thank you that you're slow to anger. And help us to be like you. Help us to be like your dear Son, and we might bring glory to you, and that your kingdom might live in us. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, the meaning of slow to anger. I'm going to put that up there. Slow to anger. Long nostrils. Long of nostrils. That's what it means. Okay, so let's go to the next one. No, I'm kidding. What does that mean, long of nostrils? Have you ever seen anybody who really got mad and they were so furious that the nostrils flared? Yeah? Have you ever seen yourself do that in the mirror? Go home and try it out. One of those bulls with the, what do they call it, the guy that does the red cape? Yeah, matador. And those bulls are so angry, and you see the nostrils just slurring because of the anger. Now, the idea here is that God is long of nostrils. He's not like that. Or the idea is that he doesn't flare up. His anger is not an anger that flares up and strikes out. That's not the way God is. Now, it's amazing that a lot of people feel that God is that way. And he does have anger. I mean, we'll look in the Old Testament. For instance, here's a time that God got angry. Because God does get angry, but he's slow to anger. And it's not a rage, but it's purposeful. Listen, his anger has purpose in it. So, one of the horrible stories. Do you remember the story where God opened the earth and a bunch of Jews got swallowed up? You remember that story? Anybody? You don't remember that story. Are you with me? Let's all stand. No, I'm kidding. And not only did the earth swallow up, but the ones that were getting away that the earth didn't swallow up, and they started running, that God threw fire down and incinerated them. Just a loving God, man, I'm telling you. Just love those Jews. What was that all about? God's anger is purposeful. That's the word I'm looking for. God's anger is not a temper. It's not a rage. What was happening at that point that he did such an incredible, disastrous thing to these people? Why would he do that? Well, let me tell you one thing that you got to be careful in is don't go against God in his purposes. Could be dangerous. Korah had got a bunch of guys together, and they were coming against Moses and Aaron because they didn't like their leadership. And so They were ready to take it over. They're ready to attack them. And God says, no, we're not going to have that. I've picked Moses and Aaron to lead the people of Israel. And so it makes me wonder, well, if God hadn't done that, maybe they could have taken it over. Maybe they were strong enough to do them in. And so God had to intervene, because let me tell you, there are some things that God's going to do, and it doesn't matter what you do. His sovereignty, what he wants to happen, is just going to happen. You have a free will, but there's some things you come against God, and it's going to be disastrous for you. Now, none of you are going to do that. Now, I heard a guy preach one time on that particular passage in Numbers, I think it is, and he said something like that, yeah, rebellion, God comes against rebellion. And if you're rebellious toward God, he might just swallow you up. Now, let me ask you something. Now, be honest. How many of you in your life, you would be honest and say, I had rebellion? Can I see? Yeah. And some of you that didn't raise your hand, talk to me afterwards. I'll point out some things. Yeah. No, that wasn't the reason of the purpose. God had a higher purpose that maybe we don't know, but I kind of look at it that, no, God's going to protect his plan for the future and whatever it is. That's kind of how I look at it. There's other times, and I'm on a quest. I haven't finished my quest. In fact, I just started it about 3 or 4 months ago, that I'm going through some of the Old Testament passages where God was angry. And because he's slow to anger. You remember the story about Nineveh? And who was the guy that went to Nineveh? Who? Jonah, thank you. Jonah was going to go to Nineveh. Jonah rebelled, but God didn't kill him. He just put him in a fish and has him go. Now, Jonah is so upset at the Ninevites because they're evil people. They're evil to the Jews, and they're a horrible nation. But God is merciful and kind and loving. And God wanted them to repent and turn. So he sends this Jewish guy who supposedly has faith in God. He sends him to set him free, to preach the truth and have him repent. And he just had an attitude the whole time. And so he just says, repent or God's going to destroy you. That basically was his preaching. And you know what happened? They repented. And it ticked off Jonah. He was so upset with God that God, you know what he said? He quotes Exodus 34 that we just read. He quotes it. And he says, I knew it. I knew you were merciful. That's interesting to me. He's angry because God does who God does. God shows his mercy as he shows his mercy. And he's going to be merciful to who he will have mercy toward. He gets all ticked off. They repent. 150 years later, though, Nineveh has turned their back upon God again. And in the book of Nahum, it talks about an angry God. An angry God. And his wrath is going to come upon them because they had not just turned their back upon God, but they were doing incredible evil. They would take some of the leaders of the Jews and they would skin them alive. That's not very nice people. I mean, none of us have been filleted. Man, that's a horrible people to do that. And Nahum quotes Exodus 34. And they don't repent. And God destroys them. But he doesn't destroy them. He didn't need to destroy them. He could have saved them if they had repented. They were Assyrians, and there was a group called the Babylonians who were raising up in power, and they came against the Assyrians and totally destroyed the Ninevites. I mean, do you know any Ninevites? No. No such animal. They all got killed by God. And God wasn't active in it, but God allowed it to happen. You see, God can do miracles. I mean, we see it in Israel. You read some of the stories in miracles where nations comes against Israel, and they say, hey, don't worry about it. I'm taking care of it. Look at the mountains. There's angels everywhere. And the angels come and overcame the enemy. I mean, amazing story about the anger of God. And so what is this anger of God? Do you have a fear of God? Now listen, you shouldn't have a fear of God that the people of Israel had when they saw Moses come down from Mount Sinai, and they were fearful because his face was aglow. And they didn't really want to, don't look at us, we don't want to see you, put something on your head, take care of this. And they were so fearful. Well, the Bible says that we haven't come to Mount Sinai, but we've come to Mount Zion, and you can read it in Hebrews 12. We've come to the church, the New Jerusalem. We've come to this place because of Jesus Christ, and we have this relationship. And so when we have a fear, it's not a fear like Mount Sinai, but it's knowing this, that God is a God of his word. And if God says, I will do this if you do this, you can believe that he's going to do it. And so you have this thing of an awesome, incredible respect for God, and with a little bit of, oh God, have mercy on me, you know, little fear that is even the Sinai fear, but just isn't overwhelming because you know a God who loves you and a God that you can lean upon and you can go to. He has anger, but it's slow to anger. That's not his first thing that he goes to. The first thing that he goes to is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, long nostril, doesn't have a rage and a temper. God's not that way. And that's not the picture of the Old Testament of our God. He planned out something for our future that's incredible in Jesus Christ. Number two, let's talk a little more about this anger, the anger of God. And but I want you to get a perspective. Several weeks ago, I used this scripture. I want to use it again. It's found in Psalms 103, and I have it for you, I believe. And 103 verse 8 says, "The Lord is merciful." Yeah. The Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. Oh, wait, do I have the wrong verse? That sounds like Exodus 34. Oh, no. Oh. Did that sound familiar to you? A quote from Exodus 34. He's quoting, the psalmist David is quoting Exodus 34. And then he says this, verse 13, "As the Father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear him, for he knows our frame and remembers that we are dust, broken and weak." Dust, broken and weak. What does that mean? He remembers our dust. That means broken and weak. We are broken and weak people. Do you look at yourself that way? Listen, God has done an incredible miracle in my life. I've changed so much since I first got saved. And in my 20s, well, we won't go there. I mean, he's changed my thinking. He's changed my heart toward people. I have a love for God like I never had before. I didn't realize that there was more of this in him. But I'm still broken and weak. I still need him. I still understand fully, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This anger of God. Now, we don't like that thought, anger. Well, no, I don't. In this day and age, we don't need a God that's angry. Now, listen, when people say that, what they're going by is they see, quote unquote, Christians who just have an attitude and anger toward them and self-righteousness, and no wonder they believe that God's that way, because how they view us sometimes. God is not that way. So what is this anger all about? Well, first of all, have you ever heard that God is a just God? That God deals with things that are not right? Now listen, we want that. We want that. You know, every time you read something or hear something on the news about drugs that are given to kids, and some die because they took the drugs, doesn't that do anything to you in your heart? Doesn't it break you? But maybe a little bit of anger too, because you know it's not right. Let me tell you, it might seem like God isn't dealing with those things. Remember, he's slow to anger, but let me tell you, he does deal with those things because he's a just God. And if we're to be honest, we would know for sure that we ought to be put to death, or his judgment on us. But because we know Jesus Christ, we don't have the curse of the law, because Jesus became a curse for us. But he's a just God. And you as a Christian, that's why the things that you go through, you can bring hell into your life just by doing things that go against what he wants. Now, you're still saved and you still have a relationship with God, but it's like this with you. And you don't realize how much hell is coming into your life. And I don't mean eternity. I just mean horrible stuff. And you know some Christians. And they say things, oh, what have I done wrong? What have I done wrong? And if you know them well enough, you could point out some things, but you're gracious and merciful, and you don't do that. This anger of God. He has anger because he's a just God, and he deals with the sins in a world. But what does that mean? And how do we measure that or evaluate that? Well, the psalmist David said that this anger is like the compassion of a father or a parent. Okay, we're on to something here. His anger is like this compassion of a father. Okay, let's see. How could we deal with that? Well, Caden last week. Caden over there. You, buddy. He's a dad. And he's got a little guy. What's his name? Kelly. No, the next one up. Asher. Who? Asher. Yeah. Remember Asher. We were standing out front, and we were talking, just having a nice conversation and just enjoying the conversation. And Asher was there. How old is he? 3. Oh, he's 3. Asher's got a lot of energy. And Asher was standing there, and then there was a kid that was on the grass. So Asher wanted to go, I don't know if he asked, but he goes shooting out, and Caden said, "Don't go in the street." Said it with some force. It didn't sound, well, it was loving, I knew it, but it was kind of forceful. And he smiled. "Don't go in the street." And Asher knew, and he was obedient. What a great kid. He sure looks good around here. So, but Caden, being a good dad, as we were talking, every once in a while he would glance and see what Asher's doing. Why do you think he was doing that? Because he didn't totally trust Asher. I'm thinking, I mean, I don't know your heart, but I'm thinking he didn't, because there are cars going fast. And he kept, every once in a while I'd look and make sure, and Asher was just there on the edge. Now, what would Cain do if he looked back and he saw Asher running toward the street? You know what he would do. He would not do, oh, Asher, I'm merciful and loving. I'm gracious toward you. Good boy. Hey, I hope you can dodge good. Those cars are going fast. Good boy. No. You know what he would do? He would yell and scream at the top of his lungs in fear that Asher was going to be hit by a car. His anger would come out. Now, sometimes God's like that. Remember, we talked about the idea of holiness, that Carrie used this, and it was an unholy adventure here because this is for worship and she was using for a baseball game. Okay, think with me. Let's say Jason, he's such a good guy, and I was going to grab it, but maybe I shouldn't. He's got it all in there. I was going to grab it and swing it. And because I want to learn how to play pickleball, and it looks like it'd be a good paddle. So if I did that, he would look at, Pastor Dave, would you please don't? He'd be gracious, unless I actually did something. Well, that's kind of weak. Let's think. There is a violin. What is it called? Stradivarius, something like that? Violin. And there's one of them that's worth $23 million. Let's say that was Jason's. Worth $23 million. Someone gifted to him. And Pastor Dave went and said, I'm going to play pickleball and grab that thing. Jason might up his emotion a little higher. But that's weak. 23 million, that's just stuff. But think with me, what if Omar, he's a pretty tough guy. Omar is pretty muscular. If you question that afterwards, just put your hand on his muscles. He's got some big ones. Now let's say, so Omar is at home, and he looks out, and Owen, how old's Owen? He's like 13? 11. He's only 11? So Owen is outside, and there's some high schoolers outside that he's looking through the window, and they decide, because they're unholy boys, they decide that they're going to use Owen to practice their karate that they've been taking, and they want to see how good it works. But they don't want Owen to fight back, so they wrap him up. And he looks out the window, and some guy comes and does a big old round kick right in the head. Now, what would Omar do? Oh, that's a pretty good kick. He's learned some things. You kidding me? He would go shooting out that door. He might even say some words that he would have to repent of later. Yelling and screaming and anger and temper. Now, I say God's not like that. But you can see why God might get angry at us. Just as he would get angry at some boys who were beating his son up, using him in an unholy, unrighteous way. Now think with me. To Omar, his son is so valuable. And him being a good father wants to protect him. How valuable are you to God? how valuable are you to God? The Bible says that we're incredibly and wonderfully made. It says that we're made in the very image of God. Now, that is so incredibly dynamic. When you think about being made in the image of God, there's no animal, there's no other creature that's made like you. You are made in a way that you can possess the very God that created you. You're made in a way that animals don't create like humans create. I mean, the next time you go into a big city and you see the skyscrapers, you see the amazing bridges in Portland, every time I go across them, they're shaking. I'm thinking, oh man, I hope they did a good job. You see what man can do. Man builds hospitals where people can be helped, but he also builds atomic bombs and weaponry that can kill masses. We are so incredibly made that we're made in the very image of God, that we're able to create with our mind and do things that no other creation can do. You're worth more than the violin. You're worth more. You're worth so much that he gave his only begotten Son. And I don't know how it worked in heaven, but I have a silly mind sometimes. I don't know how it works. God's talking to Jesus, says, hey, they're going to be doing this stuff, and they're going to turn their back upon me, and every single one of them are going to sin, and they're just going to be evil people. Yeah, I see that too, Father. Well, what should we do about that? Because I sure do love my creation. I sure do love this people that I created. Hey, son, I love them so much. Would you go down there and give your life, become a man, and to die on a cross? Now, I realize that there was probably none of that. But so much of the Bible talks about God in a way so we can understand it. No wonder he gets angry at us. He sees us running into the street and he cries out to us, stop, but we don't stop. He sees us taking drugs and ruining our life and ruining people around us that he loves so dearly. He sees us getting into sexual things because it feels so good, not even thinking of the other person that we're ruining their life, and that person's ruining my life as well. And he sees that. Is he to turn his eye from that and not face that? No. He's gracious and merciful to the point that he's willing to get angry and to do things to bring us back. David said this. He said in Psalm 23, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now, I'm speaking to some people that most of you love God. Most of you have a relationship with God. Most of you have a desire for him, an affection toward him. And God sees you, and when he sees you going down a path that's going to ruin you, he's not uptight like you as human parents get uptight at your kids. But he does have a purpose, and his rod and staff comforts us, the staff which will pull the sheep out of the briar, or the rod that will give a smack on the backside. But his love and his mercy is always there. And all you have to do is turn to him. Worship team, come on up. We're going to have communion. And church, may we just some way get the thought of how valuable we are to God. So valuable that he gave his only begotten Son. And his Son came as man, and he died on the cross for us. His blood was shed. His body was bruised and broken for us so that we could have life. And Jesus said, now listen, as often as I do this, as often as you do this, take communion, he said, I want you to do it in remembrance of me. And the remembrance is what he did, but showing the love of God. I didn't get to my last point that is really important. How should we be with anger? Are we slow to anger? Let me just read a scripture to you. And it's found in Romans 12. And it talks about the anger of God. It talks about the wrath of God. And he says, Paul says to the church, he says, never avenge yourself, but leave it to the wrath of God. See, God's going to take care of you. For it is written, vengeance is mine, and I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, and the contrary is, okay, you don't show anger, and you don't strike out. He says this, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Oh, church, Jesus said, don't even become angry with your brother. He says, if you do become angry, Paul says later, if you do become angry, don't sin. Don't strike out at them. So our anger is not to be slow. It's to be non-existent and show the very love of God, because God's going to take care of things. He's a just God. Stand with me. And as the worship team sings this song, we're going to have you come forward. There's communion in the back. You can grab that. There's on the side here. Now, if you're visiting here, this might be really awkward for you. Like, what are they doing? I like it when people pass by and, This gives us an opportunity maybe to have communion with someone, and that's good to do. If you want to just have it by yourself, that's fine. But the whole purpose of it is to remember what Jesus has done for us. Remember the love of the Father through Jesus Christ. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And so as you come and take communion, may it be a PowerPoint where you sense his love and his forgiveness. And in sensing his love and forgiveness, then to recognize, hey, there's someone I don't forgive. And allow the peace of God to come over you and forgiveness to come over you. For freely you have received of his mercy and forgiveness. Freely give mercy and forgiveness. So let's have communion. Just grab it, go back to your seat. If you want to say to someone, hey, come and have it with me. Let's have it together. You do that. Let's have communion, church.